What happens to the global economy the moment Iran loses its grip on the Strait of Hormuz? Somewhere along that narrow strip of water tonight, missiles are still flying, radar stations are still burning, and a fifth of the world's oil supply is hanging by a thread. Before we go any further, hit that like button right now because this story moves fast, and if you blink, you'll miss the next twist. Subscribe if you want to actually understand this war instead of just reacting to headlines, and send this to one person who still thinks this conflict is almost over. It isn't. Let's get into it. For months now, a quiet war has been playing out along the southern coast of Iran. Not the kind of war that ends in a single dramatic battle, but the slow, grinding kind, the kind where one side keeps hitting and the other side keeps rebuilding. This is a fight over one of the most important strips of water on the planet, the Strait of Hormuz. It's barely 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, yet almost a fifth of all the oil the world consumes has to pass through it every single day. Tankers from Saudi Arabia, from Kuwait, from the UAE, from Iran itself, all squeezing through that same tight channel, all within range of whatever Iran has built along its coastline. And what Iran has built there is not something you should underestimate. For over 2 decades, Tehran poured money, engineering talent, and military planning into one single goal: making sure that if it ever lost a straight-up fight with the United States, it could still hold the world's oil supply hostage. That's not an exaggeration. That was the entire design philosophy behind Iran's coastal defense network. Not to win a naval war, but to make sure nobody else could win one either. At least, not without paying a price the whole world would feel at the gas pump. So when you hear that American forces have been striking Iran's coastal defenses again, wave after wave, you need to understand what's actually being targeted. This isn't some remote military base out in the desert. This is the machinery sitting right next to the world's most important oil choke point. And in the last few days, that machinery has been taking one of the heaviest beatings it's seen in this entire war. Here's what we know. According to U.S. Central Command, American forces have carried out a series of coordinated strikes against Iranian military targets along the Gulf Coast, hitting coastal surveillance sites, missile storage facilities, drone launch positions, and installations tied to the Revolutionary Guard's naval wing. Officials describe these as precision strikes aimed specifically at degrading Iran's ability to threaten commercial shipping in the strait. This wasn't a single missile fired at a single target. This was a wide-layered strike package, the kind designed to hit multiple points along the coastline at once, so that even if some sites survive, the network as a whole can't function the way it used to. And almost immediately, Iranian state media confirmed explosions across several coastal provinces along the stretch of territory that hugs the strait itself. That's the story on the surface. But the real story, the one that actually explains why this matters to you, sitting wherever you are, right now watching this video, is underneath. Because here's the thing about a choke point war. It doesn't stay contained. Every time the coastline lights up, the ripple effects spread outward, into oil markets, into shipping insurance, into the price you pay to fill up your car. Maritime intelligence tracking the region has already flagged a disturbing pattern. Tankers going dark, switching off their tracking systems to avoid becoming targets. Vessels rerouting entirely rather than risk the southern corridor. Ships getting turned back after warnings from Iranian forces. This is happening right now, in real time, along one of the busiest shipping lanes on Earth. So the question isn't really what got hit last night. The question is bigger than that. Does Iran still have the ability to make good on its biggest threat, closing the world's most important oil route? Or has the American campaign finally broken the one card Tehran has been holding for over 20 years? To answer that, you need to understand exactly what Iran built, and why it was never meant to be a normal military force in the first place. Iran never tried to build a navy that could go toe-to-toe with the U.S. Fifth Fleet. That fight would be over in an afternoon, and Iranian planners have known that for decades. Instead, they built something smarter, and honestly, something a lot scarier if you think about it carefully. A layered system of shore-based anti-ship missiles, sea mines, fast attack boats, and unmanned drone boats, all packed along the narrowest, most valuable stretch of coastline on the planet. At the center of that system sits the anti-ship cruise missile. Iran's Noor missile, based on a reverse-engineered Chinese design, gives Iranian forces a strike range estimated at well over 100 kilometers, guided by radar in its final approach, so it doesn't need constant human control. Then there are the newer missiles, the ones Iranian officials claim can reach out past 200 kilometers. If even part of that range claim is true, it means launchers, sitting safely inland, tucked into hillsides and hardened bunkers, can still threaten huge stretches of the strait without ever being exposed on open ground. This is the whole point of an asymmetric defense strategy. You don't need to win a naval battle. You just need to make the cost of sailing through your waters high enough that insurance companies panic. Shipping firms reroute and the oil market does the rest of the damage for you without you firing another shot. Backing up those missiles is something even harder to fully wipe out. Naval mines, Cheap, old, brutally effective. A scattered minefield doesn't need to sink every ship that passes through. It just needs to sink one on camera, and suddenly every tanker captain and every insurance underwriter on the planet starts thinking twice about that route. Unlike a missile battery or a radar tower, a mine doesn't show up clearly from the air. You can't just bomb a minefield away. You have to sweep it piece by piece, and that takes time. Iran has been more than willing to make the other side spend. Add in fast attack boats and drone boats operated by the Revolutionary Guard's naval branch, small, cheap, built to swarm rather than overpower, and you start to see the full picture. Layer coastal radar over the top of all of it, feeding targeting data to every missile site, and every mine-laying operation along the shore, and you understand why this network has been so hard to fully dismantle, even after years of pressure. Now here's a moment to pause and let this sink in. Take a second and subscribe, if this kind of breakdown is actually helping you understand what's happening in the world right now, because there's a lot more to unpack. So how badly has this network actually been damaged? The numbers coming out of this campaign are staggering. Officials have described thousands of targets struck across Iranian territory. Dozens of naval vessels destroyed or disabled, including vessels specifically tied to mine-laying operations. Missile launch rates dropping sharply compared to where they stood when this war first began. Drone launches falling by a similar margin. On paper, that reads like a network in serious structural trouble. But here's the part that actually matters if you want to understand this war instead of just watching the highlight reel. Iran hasn't needed its coastal defenses at full strength to keep the threat alive. It's only needed them functional enough, often enough, to keep everyone guessing. And by that measure, Tehran has proven stubbornly hard to fully shut down. Even as strike after strike claims to have gutted the network, ships have still been hit crossing the strait. Tankers have gone dark trying to sneak through undetected. Commercial vessels have been struck or disabled. Iranian forces have repeatedly declared parts of the strait effectively closed and backed that claim up often enough that traffic through Hormuz has dropped dramatically at points during this conflict, sometimes by staggering margins. A network that's been declared broken over and over again keeps somehow finding the parts, the personnel, and the will to strike again. That's the uncomfortable truth sitting underneath every headline that says, "wiped out." It makes for a great headline. It makes for a terrible summary of what's actually happening on the ground. The real picture is closer to a brutal war of attrition, the United States hammering Iran's coastal infrastructure faster than Tehran can fully rebuild it, while Iran keeps proving that even a badly damaged network can still draw blood. So why does Iran keep rebuilding instead of standing down? Because for Tehran, this coastal network isn't just a military asset. It's the single most valuable card left in the entire deck. Iran doesn't have the air power to challenge the United States directly. It doesn't have the economic depth to outlast Western pressure in a straight fight. What it has is geography, a coastline sitting right on top of the world's most important oil corridor, and a defense system built specifically to weaponize that geography every time traffic through the strait drops. Every time oil prices spike, every time shipping insurers demand a war risk premium before covering a tanker. That's Iran's coastal defense network doing exactly the job it was built to do, even while it's being hit night after night by the most powerful military on Earth. And this brings us to a part of the story that a lot of coverage completely skips over: the human and diplomatic cost that keeps spreading far beyond Iran's own borders, because a strike on a coastal missile site never really stays contained to that one site. It sends shockwaves through the entire region. Iranian retaliation has repeatedly reached beyond direct exchanges with American forces. Ballistic missile launches aimed at regional targets have been intercepted over neighboring airspace on multiple occasions. Strikes tied to this conflict have hit infrastructure connected to other nations entirely. Nations that never asked to be part of this war, but happen to host American assets or sit close enough to get caught in the crossfire. Gulf states have repeatedly found themselves absorbing fallout from a fight that, on paper, is supposed to be between Iran and the United States. That's the pattern that's defined this entire conflict. Kuwait, Jordan, Bahrain, Qatar. Every one of these nations has, at some point during this war, ended up in the blast radius of a conflict they didn't start. Every strike on Iran's coastline carries the risk of becoming a strike on a country that simply happened to be standing too close. And the diplomatic fallout has been just as intense as the military fallout. Sanctions have been imposed on firms tied to schemes forcing commercial vessels to pay for special insurance just to attempt a transit through the strait. Essentially, a war tax dressed up as maritime coverage. Naval enforcement operations have led to dozens of vessels being redirected away. Real, measurable disruption to global shipping, happening in real time, not theoretical. Regional governments have been pulled deeper into this than most people realize. Iraq has had to navigate an almost impossible position, hosting American forces on its soil while facing pressure from Iranian-aligned militias operating within its own borders. all while trying to avoid becoming a full battlefield in a war between two much larger powers. Even Lebanon hasn't stayed insulated, with accusations of ceasefire violations tied to militant groups connected to Iran's broader regional network. And inside Iran itself, the pressure is becoming impossible to hide. Reports out of Tehran point to serious political strain at the highest levels of government, internal disagreements, extended periods where senior leadership has stayed unusually quiet in public, and growing signs of a leadership structure operating under real stress. That's not the profile of a government negotiating from strength. That's a government trying to fight a grinding war against the world's most powerful military while managing turmoil inside its own walls. Now let's talk about the number that actually touches your life directly, no matter where you're watching this from. Oil prices. Because in this war, oil prices function almost like a live casualty report for Iran's coastal defense network. Every time that network proves it can still strike, a tanker hit, a missile intercepted, a defiant statement from Iranian commanders, crude prices jump. Zoom out and look at how oil has moved across this entire conflict. Prices spiking sharply during the most intense strike cycles, easing back during brief periods of calm, then spiking right back up the moment Iran's coastal forces reassert themselves through another strike or another threat. That volatility, that constant whiplash, is the direct fingerprint of an unresolved fight over who actually controls the flow of oil through Hormuz. And here's a detail that should worry anyone paying close attention to how far this could still spread. There have been reports suggesting Iran has quietly reached out to allied forces in Yemen, signaling a willingness to open an entirely separate front in the Red Sea if pressure on its home coastline continues to intensify. That's Tehran essentially saying, if you take away this lever, we have another one hundreds of miles away through a proxy force that's already been striking vessels in that region. So when you ask how bad this could still get, the honest answer is worse than most people are currently pricing in. This isn't a clean, contained dismantling of a single military network sitting in one country. This is a regional war radiating outward from one central question. Who controls the flow of the world's oil? And every neighboring state, every allied militia, every trader watching an oil chart right now is being forced to react. Before we get into what happens, if this network really does collapse for good, take a second and share this video. It isn't just background noise. It's shaping the price of everything, everywhere, right now. So let's ask the question everyone watching this video actually wants answered. What happens if Iran's coastal defense network finally does collapse completely? Here's the uncomfortable truth about modern warfare that a lot of people miss. Total military collapse doesn't automatically mean the end of a conflict. Sometimes it means the opposite. It means a cornered government with fewer conventional options left, and fewer conventional options often pushes toward more desperate tools. Let's start with the more hopeful outcome, because it's real and it matters. If the American campaign genuinely succeeds in grinding down Iran's coastal missile batteries and surveillance network to the point where they can no longer meaningfully threaten shipping, the upside is enormous. The Strait of Hormuz reopens fully to normal traffic. Insurance premiums fall back toward pre-war levels. Oil prices stabilize. The global economy stops holding its breath every time state media reports another round of explosions along the coast. For a world economy that's been carrying an unpredictable choke point risk premium baked into energy markets, that outcome alone would be one of the most significant de-escalations of the decade. But here's the darker scenario, and it's the one that military analysts keep quietly flagging. A regime that loses its main conventional deterrent doesn't necessarily become more cooperative. It can become more willing to gamble. Iran built its coastal defense network specifically, so it would never have to rely on its nuclear program or regional proxy militias as a first option. If that maritime deterrent is genuinely gone, the remaining levers become relatively more important to Tehran's strategy, not less. That's exactly why signals about a potential Red Sea escalation matter so much. It's not just a random threat. It's contingency planning from a government that can read the same battlefield reports everyone else can. A government that knows its home turf coastal defenses are being ground down and is already looking for the next lever to pull. And there's the nuclear question sitting underneath all of this, largely unresolved and rarely discussed with seriousness. If Iran's conventional coastal deterrent collapses entirely, the pressure to lean harder into nuclear ambiguity only grows stronger. A country that feels it has lost its ability to threaten the world's oil supply has a powerful incentive to hold on to its most extreme card. Then, there's the human reality inside Iran itself, which shapes everything else happening in this war. Casualty figures from this conflict vary depending on the source, but every estimate points toward rising civilian and military losses. Extended communications blackouts, and an economy straining under both the direct cost of war and renewed international sanctions. A government absorbing that level of internal pressure while watching its deterrent get dismantled is facing an extraordinarily difficult decision. And that's the part of the story that doesn't fit neatly into a dramatic headline. There have been real diplomatic efforts running quietly alongside every strike cycle. Ceasefires that held for days before collapsing. Mediation attempts from regional powers trying to find a way out. Frameworks signed, then contested, then partially honored. This war has proven again and again that it can pause and that those pauses can be shattered within days. A single tanker strike, a single missile exchange, a single miscalculation along that same contested stretch of coastline. So where does that actually leave things right now? The honest answer is this: degraded, not defeated. Every measurable indicator points toward a network that is significantly weaker than it was when this war started. But significantly weaker and completely gone are two very different things. And Iran has proven over and over that it can still strike back even from a badly damaged position. The next chapter of this war is going to come down to one simple, brutal question underneath everything else. Does the United States have the political will and the sustained resources to keep grinding this network down to actual zero? And does Iran have the physical capacity and internal political will to keep rebuilding and striking back faster than that network can be dismantled? Until one of those two things breaks decisively, expect exactly what we've seen for months now. Strikes, retaliation, a pause, a spike in oil prices, another strike. The coastal defense network Iran spent over 20 years building is under more sustained pressure than ever before. But as of right now, it is bent, it is battered, it is bleeding badly, it is not yet broken. And that single fact, more than any single headline claiming a total wipeout, is the thing that should actually keep your attention. Because a wounded network with something left to lose is often more dangerous, not less than one that's already been destroyed. The next move on that coastline could send oil prices climbing again within hours, or pull another country into a war it never asked to join. Or it could be the strike that finally actually tips this entire 20-year strategy over the edge for good. Nobody watching this video right now knows which one it's going to be. Not the analysts, not the traders, not the governments involved. That uncertainty is exactly why this story matters, and exactly why it's worth watching closely in the days ahead. If you want to understand where this war goes next, before it shows up in your gas prices, stay subscribed to this channel. Because whatever happens along that Iranian coastline is going to move oil markets, reshape alliances, and decide the fate of the Strait of Hormuz.